everyone, and welcome back to class. In today's lecture, we're going to talk about the rise of America as a world power and also go into World War I. America, at the end of the 19th century, has been trying to put itself back together from the Civil War. It has been looking at catching up with the industrial age and getting all of the domestic issues going on within the United States taken care of. And about 1890, they're going to pick their heads up and go, oh, wait a second, we're being left behind. Because in the time frame from before the Civil War up until 1890, Europe has been dividing up the rest of the world between them. I'm going to share my screen with you, and let you see this map here. Now, this map gives you an idea of how Europe had carved up the rest of the world. Everything that's in blue belongs to France. Everything that's in red belongs to Great Britain. It's at this time that you could say that the sun never set on the British Empire. They had possessions all around the world. Now, this is just showing you the Eastern Hemisphere. They also still had control of Canada and still had possessions down the Caribbean and I think maybe even in South America. And so we look around and go, well, we want some. It's not right for you guys to get all of it. And so it's at this point that we are going to start looking at imperialism. Now, it doesn't mean that we want to get involved in anybody else's conflicts. We had been warned by George Washington when he left office at the end of his second term to stay out of the affairs of Europe. And so we're still going to maintain a isolationist type of policy when it comes to military and political things, but we want to get in on the economic side of all of this. We had done Manifest Destiny. We had managed to go from sea to shining sea, and now we were looking for new areas. Some of the reasons to expand especially had to do with economic growth. We're looking for more resources, and we're looking for new markets, for more people to buy our things. Keep in mind that a country makes its money off of what it sells, not what it buys. And so we want to gain in economic power. We want to spread democracy and Christianity, just like we had spread it across the country. We want to spread it around the world. And so we're going to get into this missionary zeal of sending missionaries to the darkest places in the world to bring them to Christianity. And of course, it's all a matter of power. Power kind of drives just about everything. When Alfred Thayer Mahan writes his book, The Influence of Sea Power Upon History, his premise in this book is that every substantial world power throughout history has always had a powerful navy. And so that's going to cause us to increase our navy. If we're going to increase the number of ships and increase how far they're going to go, then we need to have places where they can refuel. Because ships during this time period ran on coal. And I don't know if you guys have ever been sent into the store to pick up a bag of charcoal for the night's cookout, but those bags can be really heavy. Well, multiply that by how much coal it's going to take to make a ship run. And so ships could not go all the way across the Pacific without running out of coal. And so they're going to also gather up places where they can have these coaling stations so they can refuel. So places like places in the Caribbean, places in the Pacific are going to be places where we can establish bases and we can start spreading our navy all the way around the world. You also have this idea under social Darwinism of the strong ones need to protect the weak ones. It's all out of that social Darwinist theory of survival of the fittest. The strong will survive and the weak will be weeded out. But it also gives you that responsibility a lot of them will take on of, well, we need to look after these poor, unfortunate little countries so that they don't get squashed. And so we are going to start expanding outside of our borders. With Manifest Destiny, we have annexed Texas, California. We have all the Southwest. We have made sure that Europe can't interfere over here in the Western Hemisphere anymore. And so we are going to start adding on to the continental United States. The first thing we're going to do is purchase Alaska from the Russians. This is going to be known as Seward's Folly. He's the one that, Secretary of State Seward is the one that's going to negotiate this deal with the Russians, and the American public is going to go, have you lost your mind? That is a frozen wasteland. That's just a waste of money. And it's going to stay that way until we find gold in the Muir Hills and the Klondike Gold Rush, and it's going to not last as long as even the California Gold Rush does, but you're going to have this surge of people going to Alaska to get rich. Over time, we will find another resource that's going to replace the gold, and that is what's known as black gold, which is oil. And so we still Alaska has still become a very, very profitable acquisition during this time. Now, we're also going to annex Midway Island. Now, this is a set of uninhabited islands right smack in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. That's why it was named Midway. And it's going to become very instrumental when we get to World War II. But it starts off as a coaling station, a halfway point for ships as they're crossing across the Pacific. And then we're also going to become very interested in Hawaii. The interest in Hawaii is going to start in 1887 when planters and missionaries start coming into Hawaii. Hawaii is going to allow the U.S. Navy to have a base there, so that's going to be a really good thing, giving us a forward base into the Pacific. But these planters are having to pay a tariff for all the things that they are shipping and exporting into the United States, because Hawaii is monarchy. It is not part of the United States. And it's ruled by Queen Liliuokalani. And in 1894, there is going to be an uprising. And we're just going to kind of stand back, the planters there, the American planters, and just kind of let it happen. Now, there were people like Sanford Dole who are going to call for the annexation of Hawaii right then. But at the time, the president was Grover Cleveland, and he was not an expansionist. I'm going to show you pictures here. So this is Queen Liliuokalani, known as Queen Lil. She's the last queen of Hawaii as a monarchy. This is Sanford Dole. Now, I guess you can imagine what Sanford Dole grew, because his name is plastered on all these things today. So yes, Dole pineapple, Dole bananas, all those things came from out of his company. And so when William McKinley becomes president in 1896, then the process is going to be put in place to annex Hawaii, and that's going to happen in 1898. Now, the Hawaiian people were not happy about this. The royal band will refuse to play, and the debutantes will cry as they bring down the Hawaiian flag and raise up the American flag. And it will be a territory from 1898 until 1959 is when it becomes a state. Alaska and Hawaii become states in the same year. Now, we're also going to get involved in the Spanish-American War. We've heard about trouble going on down in Cuba. Cuba is still ruled by Spain. And word gets back to the United States that the Spanish are mistreating the Cubans. Anybody that resists Spanish rule are being put into reconcentration camps. And so the newspapers get a hold of this. And these two guys right here, Joseph Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst, are competing with each other over who can outsell newspapers. And if you can show a wider circulation, then you can charge more for your advertising. And that's how newspapers made their money, was by charging for advertising. And so they're trying to increase their circulation by having the most outlandish stories and the things that are going to attract readers to pick up their newspaper. And so this is going to kick off what becomes known as yellow journalism. You know it today as fake news, but it's been around since 1898. And so they are going to depict the Spaniards as these villains. So let me go back to the previous slide. You're going to have, Spain as, the villain, the bad guy, and America as the rescuer. All of the pictures of the Cubans are going to be of women and children. And so it's going to raise up American sympathy towards the Cubans. Now, William McKinley is trying to stay out of it, not a whole lot, didn't want to really get involved. But then we intercept a letter from the Spanish ambassador, and he is totally ripping McKinley and criticizing him and calling him all kinds of bad stuff. And back in this time period, you didn't do that. Now, we today are used to people ripping the president, whichever one it is. But back in 1898, that didn't happen. That was a high insult. And so at that point, McKinley is going to say, okay, I'll send somebody down there to check this out. And so he's going to send the USS Maine down to Havana Harbor. Now, this is a U.S. battleship. I know that it's a battleship because it's named after a state. So, all battleships were named after states. I don't know that we got to having 48 battleships, but anytime the USS Texas that's down in Houston, the USS Alabama that is over in Mobile, Alabama, those are all battleships. And so he's going to send the USS Maine down there, and it's hanging out in Havana Harbor, and in the middle of the night, this thing blows sky high. And so they're immediately going to blame Spain for this. And newspapers across the country are going to publish this atrocity that's happened by Spain. And it's going to be these kinds of images in these two corners that are going to get the most response. And that's because they are more graphic. And it is going to make Americans furious. And so this is what's going to kick off what becomes known as the Spanish-American War. So you have primary causes and secondary causes and triggers on all of these kinds of events. So your primary cause is going to be yellow journalism. Your secondary cause is going to be the Deloma letter. And your trigger is going to be the explosion of the Maine. And that's how we get into the Spanish-American War. Now, this war is going to be nicknamed the Splendid Little War because we're only in this war for about 6 months, and we get a whole lot of stuff out of it. Teddy Roosevelt is, at this time in 1898, he is Undersecretary of the Navy. He's not president yet. And as soon as we declare war on Spain, he's going to get a telegram to Admiral Dewey, who is over the American fleet in the Pacific by the Philippines. And this telegram is going to tell Dewey to sink the Spanish fleet. Now, Spain also had control of the Philippines. It had control of the Philippines for 100 years. And it's going to take maybe 7 hours for the American fleet to sink the entire Spanish fleet. And so that's going to be a victory for America. You've also got the Battle of San Juan Hill, and Teddy Roosevelt's also going to be involved in that. As soon as he sends this telegram off, not too long after that, he is going to resign as Undersecretary of the Navy, and he is going to round up all of his rich buddies, and they're going to join a group called the Rough Riders. If you ever get to go to San Antonio, there is a hotel right next to the Alamo called the Minger. And they say that Teddy Roosevelt haunts it because he was there during the Spanish-American War time, rounding up guys to join the Rough Riders. Now, here is a picture of this group. That's Teddy Roosevelt there in the middle. He is not the leader of this group, but he is probably the most well-known of the Rough Riders. And he will be the one that leads the charge up San Juan Hill. It's going to be a glorious victory for the United States. Okay? Now, there are two amendments that are very, very important to remember that go with this particular war. And these are not constitutional amendments. Okay? They're just, they're agreements, and they call them amendments. So the first one is the Teller Amendment. And with the Teller Amendment, we're going to recognize Cuban independence once we defeat Spain. And then with the Platt Amendment, we're going to be allowed a spot on Cuba called, and it's going to be right there at Guantanamo Bay. It's going to be for a naval base. It is still there today. You may have heard of it today. That's sometimes called Gitmo. Every Navy base has got a brig, and at this particular Navy base since 9/11, that's where they've held the terrorists that they captured after 9/11. And that's why you hear so much about it today. And so 6 months after this war starts, they're going to sign the Treaty of Paris. Now, I don't know if you've been keeping up through your history study of how many treaties of Paris there have been. If you've studied world history and American history, there's tons of them. But just in American history, this is the third Treaty of Paris. There's the Treaty of Paris of 1763 that ends the French and Indian War. 1783 that ends the American Revolution, and now 1898 that's going to end the Spanish-American War. So if you're ever taking a history test and there's a question on there about which treaty ended a particular war and you can't remember, and Treaty of Paris is one of your choices, pick it, because you stand a better chance of it being right. Now the Treaty of Paris is going to give us the Philippines, Guam, and Puerto Rico. Okay. Now, the Philippines are not going to be real happy about this. They know that Cuba got their independence, and they're saying, well, why don't we get our independence? Unfortunately, McKinley did not feel like they were educated enough to be able to rule themselves. He was very patronizing, and he kind of looked down their nose. I mean, he would actually say, we need to protect our little brown brothers. And so there's going to be a group under a Filipino named Emilio Aguinaldo who's going to wage a 3-year resistance against American rule in the Philippines. Now, we will have control of the Philippines until I think it's 1945 when they gain their independence, and we'll have a presence over there until the 1990s. We have a really big Navy base over there and an Air Force base. Once, I think it was in the late 1990s, the volcano Mount Pinatubo is going to erupt, and it's going to bury Clark Air Force Base in ash. And at that point, the lease is just about up, and so we will give the Philippines back, to the Filipinos, and we will leave, and we don't have bases over there anymore. So that is the Spanish-American War. Now, you have people in this country that are going to be pro-imperialism, and you're going to have people in this country that are going to be anti-imperialist. And they have good reasons on both sides. The pros is that, it's going to give us more raw materials. It's going to expand our markets. It's going to make us a great nation. And it's going to give us these coaling stations. On the other hand, people like Mark Twain, Andrew Carnegie, William Jennings Bryan are all going to say, this totally goes against what we stand for as Americans. And so there's going to be this conflict, and that's known as the foreign policy spectrum. So you have this line, and you have the way pro on this side and the way con on this side, and then everybody else kind of falls in between. Now, another thing that is going to be dealt with during this time period is the open door policy. And you need to remember that the open door policy is totally with China. Okay, so here's China. These are known as spheres of influence. And you can see where all these different countries have, this was the French section, this was the British section, Russia had some up here, Japan had these. And so each group had their own little spot to trade. Well, if you'll notice on this map, there's nothing in here that gives America any part of China. And we want our section. And so Secretary of State John Hay is going to propose an open door policy where all the spheres go away and everybody has equal opportunity to trade based off of competition and best prices and stuff like that with China. And so this cartoon right here is a very common one for the open door policy, where you have Uncle Sam standing up here saying, you guys just can't carve up, China. It's not right, and we need to have peace in there. And all you're doing is taking advantage of China. There are several different cartoons that have to do with the open door policy. And so by the time we get to this point, we have our hand in a lot of different things. One of the advantages of having control of the Philippines was that it was going to give us closer access to these markets in China. Right? So we've got stuff all over the Pacific now. We've got stuff down here in the Caribbean. And so we pretty much expanded outward quite a bit. Another cartoon that is quite common to see is this one here. I have not talked about Uncle Sam. Uncle Sam is not a real person. It's just an image that represents America. And if you look at this cartoon closely, here's Uncle Sam sitting here trying to say, I don't know which one I'm going to take next. And you have McKinley, because you can see McKinley written on the waiter towel. And he's looking at a map of all the different things that he wants to pick. Now, the nice thing about this particular slide, it gives you a laundry list of all the different things that we have acquired and when we acquire them. And so you can see that by the time we get to the end of the Spanish-American War, we have gone from being an absolute nobody to now at least being a bit player on the stage. We're being noticed. We may be like, secondary cast. Okay. As things go on, when World War I and then World War II, then we'll move from being just a bit player to being the star of the show. Okay. Now, because we have all these possessions now, we're going to send our Navy around the world. And it's known as showing the Great White Fleet. And that was not a racist term at the time. It was because the ships were painted white. It's not until we get into world wars that we realize that it's probably a good idea if we paint our ships closer to the color of the ocean. And so that's why they're kind of a bluish gray. During World War II, a guy in Great Britain is going to find that if you paint them with this dazzle on them with all these different directions of lines, that it makes it more difficult for submarines to get a bead on how fast the ship is going, which direction they're going. And so later on, they'll start painting ships different colors. But at the time, they were all painted white. And so that's why it was known as the Great White Fleet. And it's basically a whistle-stop tour, port-of-call tour around the world showing the power of the United States Navy. Okay? Now, one of the things that's going to be important about doing this has to do with being able to get from one ocean to the other, because now we are a two-ocean Navy. And it takes a long time to get from one side to the other. So back in, before 1904, you had to go all the way down here around the bottom of South America to get over here to the other side. And I don't know how much you remember about geography, but Drake's Passage down here is some of the most treacherous waters in the world. If you've seen the movie The Perfect Storm or the movie Moby Dick about the whale, it's all down here in this area. And so it was very dangerous. It took a long time. And so they're looking for a shorter way to get from one side to the other. Now, European countries had been trying for some time to be able to negotiate with Colombia to be able to have access to this isthmus right here. Now, an isthmus is a skinny neck of land that joins two larger bodies of land. And Panama was controlled by Colombia at the time. And Colombia would not talk to anybody. I mean, we even get in on it, and we offer them more money, and they say, no, 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 no. Okay? And so what Roosevelt's going to do is we're going to behind the scenes support Panama because they do not want the control of Colombia anymore. And so we're going to support them to overthrow Colombia. And when they become independent, then in return, they are going to allow us access to this Isthmus of Panama. So you have the this little bitty skinny neck, and it's kind of interesting. The Atlantic entrance, the Caribbean entrance, is further west than the Pacific entrance. It kind of goes diagonally this way. Now it's going to take about 10 years to dig this canal across this isthmus. It's 40 miles long and about 10 miles wide. There are two treaties that we negotiate with the Panamanians. One is called the Hay-Bonal-Varela Treaty that gives us access to this 10-mile wide, 40-mile long section of Panama. And the other one is the Hay-Pontefract Treaty that once the canal is dug, then it is going to have, we agree to it being open all the time, during wartime, during peacetime, to all countries. So yes, during World War II, German ships could go through the Panama Canal just as well as Allied ships could. I wanted to show you this picture here. This is one of the gates. I will post onto Blackboard for you a video that you're going to find very humorous to see. It's by the Animaniacs, and it's called 40 Miles on the Panama Canal. And it'll give you a better idea about how the canal works. A canal is a way to be able to raise and lower water levels so that ships can go from one end to the other. My son was a submariner on the USS Alaska when he was in the Navy, and they were taking the ship from Washington over to Virginia, and so he got to go through the Panama Canal. It's really, really interesting. Now, a couple of things that are going to come out of this while they're digging this canal is they're going to find out what causes yellow fever. This guy here, William Gorgas, is going to find out that it's mosquitoes that transmit yellow fever, that transmit malaria, and so they are going to start fumigating to eradicate mosquitoes. Now, I'm using this word on purpose because we don't use fumigation a whole lot anymore, but a lot of times when you're taking a test, it shows up in the question of the test and you don't know what they're talking about. And so that's why I wanted you to know that fumigation is to spray for bugs. And so, like in the summertime around here, we have issues with West Nile virus. And I don't know if y'all know this or not, but most cities in the middle of the night while you're sleeping will go through the neighborhoods and fumigate, spray to kill off mosquitoes, to keep West Nile virus from being an issue. Now this, digging the Panama Canal is going to cause America to start meddling in the affairs of Latin America. And Teddy Roosevelt is going to start being depicted in cartoons as this police officer of Latin America. Now, as you can see in your notes, there is something called the Roosevelt Corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. Now, if you remember from your first semester of history, the Monroe Doctrine is where President Monroe, in a speech to Congress, basically tells Europe to stay home, not to come over and meddle in the Western Hemisphere anymore. Don't need to be over here. Everything's good. And they choose to honor that. Well, in the succeeding years, Latin American countries like Venezuela and Bolivia have taken out large loans from European countries, and they're not paying it back. And Roosevelt's afraid that that's going to give them reason and justification for coming back over here and getting involved in the Western Hemisphere. So he's going to say, hold up, hold up, hold up, I got this. We're going to pay you guys in Europe, and then they can owe us. And when you owe somebody money, now you basically have given them the right to control you until you pay them back. One of the reasons why I don't like to owe people money. And so Teddy Roosevelt is going to now, set America up as the police officers of Latin America. And each president, from Teddy Roosevelt to Taft to Wilson and on, are going to formulate a foreign policy that has something to do with Latin America. Now let's talk about these different foreign policies. Teddy Roosevelt, his foreign policy was known as big stick diplomacy. That's why you see this bat here. Also known as gumboat diplomacy. He believed that if you walk softly and carry a big stick, you will go far. And if you look at how America does, I mean, you let some other country like North Korea or Iran start talking stuff about they're going to do this and they're going to do that and start threatening other people, all we have to do is park an aircraft carrier in the Persian Gulf or over in the Sea of Japan, and they hush. We don't really have to do anything else because they understand the might of the United States military. That's big stick diplomacy. Okay. Now, Taft is going to change that. His is going to be known as dollar diplomacy. So let's exchange dollars for bullets. Let's invest economically in these countries instead of being the big bully on the block. Okay. And then Woodrow Wilson, his is going to be known as moral diplomacy. He's going to try and make us a kinder, gentler nation, appeal to their to their better side. And so we're going to negotiate with countries that have pro-democracy tendencies and avoid ones that are being dictators or absolute monarchs. And so the cartoons that I've shown you are ones that are very common in relation to each one of these foreign policies. Now, in your notes, you're going to see where I have given you a prompt. It says, to what extent did American economic and ideological interests benefit from the territorial expansion and imperialism of the late 1800s and early 1900s? And then I've given you 3 columns. The acquisition, was it an economic or was it an ideological? Okay. So, you're looking at your acquisitions. It could be Alaska, Hawaii, the Philippines, Guam, Puerto Rico, Panama Canal. So look at all your different acquisitions. I would put down 3 or 4 of them. Make sure I defined what they were. And then I would address how they were, how and if they were an economic benefit and how and if they were an ideological benefit. Now, when you're talking about ideology, you're talking about the spread of Christianity. You're talking about the spread of democracy. So those, a spread of the American way of life. That would be our ideology. So this is a good exercise trying to make sure that you're ready if this shows up as an essay question, if it shows up as a short answer question, a quiz question, something like that, then you kind of have it already outlined how everything lays out. Now I'm going to move on to the next big event that happens in this chapter, and that's going to be World War I. Now, in the years leading up to World War I, you have got these different countries that have made alliances with each other for mutual protection. Okay, and it is going to entangle Europe in a system of secret alliances. So the causes that led up to World War I, you have the imperialism that we just talked about. Everybody's trying to grab up the most countries. I got more, that type of thing. If you've got all these possessions, then you also have got to have a strong military to protect what you got. So now you have this arms race. Now keep in mind that an arms race is not a race on your elbows. It is a race over who's got the biggest and the baddest weapons. Okay? And then it's going to fuel nationalism. Now, to be proud of your country is not a bad thing. It's when you take it to that next step of you are so proud of being whatever country you are to the detriment and hatred of other countries to the point where you think, I get to exist and you don't. I'm going to come and take you over. That's when it's a bad thing. And by the time we get into the years leading up to World War I, it had gotten to that point. And then now you have all these secret alliances that are going to pull all these groups in. So let me give you who's on which side. On the Triple Entente, you're going to have Great Britain, France, Russia, and Serbia. Those are the main countries. Okay? These are the countries that are going to eventually become the allies when war breaks out. The Triple Alliance is going to be Austria-Hungary, Germany, Bulgaria, and the Ottoman Empire, which is also known as Turkey. So the orange countries here, or I guess reddish-orange, are the Triple Alliance. The green countries are the Triple Entente. Okay? And they're going to change their names once the war breaks out. So Triple Entente becomes the Allies. Triple Alliance become the Central Powers. Right? In your notes, you'll notice that Italy is listed originally under the Triple Alliance. Once war starts, they're going to switch over here to the Allies. Now, let me give you a little bit of background on how Germany and Italy become solid countries. In the years leading up to 1871, the Messina brothers in Italy and Otto von Bismarck in Germany have instigated conflict with their neighbors and gotten in on the winning side of the conflict to get on the winning side of the treaty. To the victor goes the spoils. And so they had managed each one to consolidate the city-states in Italy or the little princedoms in Germany into solid countries by 1871. So in 1871, Italy is a solid country and Germany is a solid country. Right? Now there's this little bitty country right here, you can hardly see it, named Serbia. And it's being controlled by Austria-Hungary. And there's a group within Serbia that doesn't like this. It's a group called the Black Hand. Okay? And they have paid attention to what Italy and Germany had done to be able to consolidate their countries. And so they think, ooh, we can get out from underneath the control of Austria-Hungary just by instigating the conflict. And so the Crown Prince of Austria-Hungary is on a tour in Sarajevo, which is the capital of this area down here. Now, this all becomes Yugoslavia at one point for about, 80 years. And then it will also dissolve. But Sarajevo is the capital of Serbia. And so the Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie are coming to, going through the town, and they're in an open car parade through the town, waving at all the people. Okay? There has been a failed attempt at assassination on their way to the palace. And they knew this had happened. They knew there had been a failed attempt. They get to the palace, they go in, they have a scrumptious lunch, they come back out, and they get in the same open-air car to continue on this parade. Well, a guy named Gavrilo Princip gets a lucky shot, and he gets one shot, and it goes straight through the Archduke and his wife and kills them both. Now, this would be like killing Prince Charles in England. He's the next in line to the throne. Archduke Franz Ferdinand was next in line to the Austrian-Hungary throne. And so Austria-Hungary is up in arms about this. They send an ultimatum to the Serbian government. Now, the Serbian government had nothing to do with this, but they're going to send them, you have to do this and this, or it's going to be on. Well, they sent them a bunch of demands that they knew that the Serbians could not adhere to. And so Austria-Hungary is going to declare war on Serbia. Well, Serbia is friends with Russia, so they're going to start mobilizing. When Russia starts mobilizing, Germany's going to start mobilizing. When they start mobilizing, France is going to start mobilizing. When Germany finally kicks it off, they're going to invade France, going straight through innocent neutral Belgium, and that's going to bring the British in. So in about 3 months, you've got the entirety of Europe at war with each other. Okay. Now, you'll notice in your notes that America doesn't get into this war until 1917. So we're not a part of the alliance system. And so here's a cartoon that kind of gives you an idea of all the entangling alliances and who's friends with who. But the better graphic for this is this one here. I don't know if you're familiar with the movie Lord of the Rings, but within 6 months, the entirety of Europe is tangled up in a spider's web of war. And it is going to drag them all down into this for 4 years. Now, so your trigger is going to be the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. The war begins in Europe in July of 1914. Now, there's going to be all kinds of new weapons that are going to be used in this war. And I've got some pictures of them here for you. Now, some of them aren't new. Some of them we've had around for a while. Railroads, battleships, cannons, trench warfare. We've even had submarines around for a while. The first submarine was used in the Revolutionary War. It was called the Turtle. It was a little round, one-person submarine. So submarines have been around for a while. But there are other weapons that are new or improved that are going to be used in this war. And I just kind of wanted to give you a visual of what all these look like. The trenches are going to be, they're about 20 feet deep, 8 to 10 feet, or 10 to 12 feet wide. And the soldiers are going to basically live in these trenches for 4 years. They're going to dig themselves little cubbies over here on the side to get out of the rain. This is where terms like trench foot comes from. Because you're living in the dirt, you're also going to be having to deal with all of the critters that live in the dirt with you. And so they're going to have competitions on who can kill the most rats at night. Or they're going to have problems with lice. So terms like going through something with a fine-tooth comb, that is a reference to this, because you have to use a fine-tooth comb to be able to scrape lice off of hair. Picking nits. If someone's being real nitpicky, nits are lice eggs, and so you have to be very careful to pick them off. And so that's where all those old terms come from. We use them today as as something different, but because we just don't know where they come from. Airplanes are going to be new in this war, and you can tell World War I airplanes from World War II airplanes because of the number of wings. World War I airplanes have at least 2, if not 3 wings, whereas World War II planes are going to be single-winged across. This is a submarine of this time period. It's relatively small. The submarine that my son was on was almost 2 football fields long. It held 180 men, whereas this one might do good to hold about 20. Tanks are going to be new in this war. And they don't come out until about halfway or a little later in the war, but it's going to be a game changer when they finally get out there. This kind of a machine gun is new. Now, the first machine gun was used in the Civil War, and it was a coffee grinder on a barrel type of thing. Very rudimentary. It's going to evolve into the Gatling gun, but the Gatling gun was on like cannon wheels, and it took a couple of people to be able to turn the crank that made the barrel turn. Whereas this particular machine gun is run by gas, and it runs a whole string of bullets through it. Now, you will also notice that these guys are wearing masks, and that is because of this stuff you see hanging back here in the back. Poisonous gas is going to be used in this war for the first time. They're going to start off with chlorine gas. Chlorine gas, it hangs close to the ground, and it fills up your lungs and turns your lungs to jelly. You will cough yourself to death. Mustard gas comes in later. Mustard, it wasn't mustard and it wasn't gas. It would land on your skin, and it would burn your skin, it burn your eyes, burn your lungs. And so poisonous gas warfare was new to this war. Now, I also wanted to give you this overshot of the trench system. And you'll notice that the trenches that are facing enemy lines are all jiggy-jagging back and forth. And the ones that go to the rear echelon are straighter. Well, they kept them going this way, jig-jag, so that if their lines were infiltrated by the enemy couldn't get a straight shot straight down the line. So it could only go this far because there's a curve right there. There was a group called sappers, and they were tunnelers, and they would tunnel across no man's land to get into the trenches of the other side. Now, yeah, there are going to be a lot of these guys that are going to die in collapse tunnels and stuff like that. The war is a bloodbath. An entire generation of European boys are going to die in this war. The ones that survive are going to be without arms and legs, or maybe have lost their sight. Some will be terminally coughing. for the rest of their lives. And so it is a very, very devastating war. Now, we're going to try to stay out of this. The first thing that's going to happen is Wilson is going to declare American neutrality and stay out of this. Now, we have reasons for this. It's not our fight. It's too far away. There's a 3,000-mile pond between us and Europe, so it's really too far. It's expensive to wage war, and we have people in this country that have family on both sides, so you have divided loyalties. You've also got people in this country that are like the Irish. The Irish would very much like to see the British get their comeuppance. They have hated the British ever since before America became a colony, because it's going to be Ireland where the British first practiced colonization, and they don't treat the Irish very well. And so there's a lot of divided loyalties. But we are going to trade more with the Allies because they're the ones that can get to us. The Allies are going to blockade Germany where they can't get out. Austria-Hungary is already landlocked. And so our trade network is going to be almost singularly with the Allied countries. And so we're going to start leaning that way. Now, you're going to have two groups in this country that are going to talk about, war and what would happen. And one group is called the preparedness group. We're going to get stuck into this. We need to go ahead and get ourselves ready and get our ducks in a row, because they're going to drag us into it. And then you have the other side, peace at all costs. No. If we start looking like we're mobilizing, then they're going to attack us and get us into this war anyway. So these are the two sides as we get closer and closer to the war. Well, there are going to be some things that are going to happen that are going to drag us closer into it. The first one is going to be the sinking of the Lusitania. It is a British liner, like it's the sister ship of the Titanic, and it is carrying 128 Americans, and it's going to get torpedoed off the southern coast of Ireland and sink. And but this does not get us into the war. This happens in 1915, and we don't get into the war for 2 more years. But it's going to make us angry. In response to this, we are going to issue the Sussex Pledge that Germany's going to agree to where they're going to stop sinking ships without warning. So they're going to say, okay, we're fixing to sink you guys, get everybody off. And they're going to adhere to that for like 9 months. But in January of 1917, they are going to start sinking ships again without warning. And they're going to start sinking American merchant vessels without warning. And so in April, I'm sorry, I almost skipped something. We also have got the Zimmerman telegram, and this is it in code, and then this is it written out. And with the Zimmerman telegram, Germany is trying to entice Mexico to attack us across our southern border. And when Germany wins the war, they will give Mexico all the stuff they lost in the Mexican cession. So Texas all the way over to California. But Mexico's going to go, no, I don't think so. We've already had the Americans beat us 2 times, maybe 2.5 times in war, and we don't want to mess with them. But we intercept this telegram. So the unrestricted submarine warfare resumption is what is going to be the main cause of us getting into the First World War, with the Zimmerman telegram coming right behind it. So on April 2nd of 1917, Wilson is going to ask Congress for a declaration of war, which he will get. And our objective of going to war was to keep the world safe for democracy. Now, as soon as we go to war, or declare war, then you're going to have they're going to start up the draft, the Selective Service Act, and to this day it's still in effect. So all guys, when they turn 18, have got by federal law to register for the draft. Now, we haven't had an active draft since 1972, and I don't see any reason to have one anytime in the near future. But that gets everybody kind of lined up. If we ever do have to go to war, then it has these steps already in motion to be able to raise an adequate army, or a military, very quickly. They're going to put John J. Pershing in charge of the AEF, which stands for the American Expeditionary Force. That's going to be our forces in northern France. And he was known as Blackjack Pershing. And that's because at one time he had been over the Buffalo Soldiers. And he was very proud to be over this group. Now, his compadres in the military were making fun of him when they nicknamed him Blackjack. But he kind of embraced that term because he really enjoyed being the leader of these guys. And so that's where he got the name Blackjack Pershing. Now, there are going to, you need to know some of the major battles. You don't need to know all of them. But the Battle of Chateau Thierry, the Battle of Cantigny, and the Battle of the Argonne Forest are the three that you need to know. These are the three that Americans played the biggest roles in. And the last one is the one that's going to cause Germany to agree to an armistice. Now, this is total war. So everybody gets involved. And so you're going to have a lot of propaganda put out by the Committee on Public Information trying to encourage men to enlist, families to conserve, to scrap drives, and that's what all these posters are. So these are known as propaganda posters. They're going to plant victory gardens so that they can grow their own food and save the commercially grown vegetables to send over to the troops. You have to understand that a military fights on its stomach, and that doesn't mean they're crawling around on the ground. If you don't feed them well, then they don't fight well. Just like those of you who are athletes, if you don't eat well, you don't play well. And so that's what this poster is right here about, growing your own food. They're going to get people to buy war savings stamps and war bonds. A war bond is like a savings bond. You go to the bank, you got to get a $25 savings bond, and they get it all printed up, and they say, okay, give me $12.50. And you give them the money, they give you the $25 savings bond, you hang on to it till it matures. It takes 7 years, and then after 7 years, you can take it back, and they'll give you $25 for it. And so it is a way of the government being able to borrow money over a certain time and being able to pay double back when the time comes. But there are going to be restrictions on civil liberties as the war progresses. There is going to be a guy named Schenck who is passing out pamphlets or mailing them out, trying to convince men not to register for the draft. And he's going to get arrested for this, and it's going to go all the way to the Supreme Court. And the court's going to come back and say, in times of clear and present danger, the government can restrict your freedom of speech. It was a means of undermining the government's attempt to provide security and safety, is what they were saying. So you're going to have anarchists who are going to get deported if they're nationals or not, they're not American citizens. Others will be jailed, and so there's going to be an infringement on American civil liberties during this time. Now, a way to fund the war, besides just by doing war bonds, they're also going to use the income tax that was instituted in 1909. They're going to have scrap drives. They're going to borrow money from investors, things like that. War, unfortunately, is good for the economy, but war is also expensive. Now, war is good for the economy because it creates jobs. But it also can be very, 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 very expensive. Now, they're going to establish several boards across the country to be able to make sure America keeps working, keeps moving forward, that type of thing. So you're going to have the War Industries Board that's going to keep the factories running. You're going to have the War Labor Board that is going to keep the workers happy. You have the Trade Board that's going to keep trade going. Okay. Now, you've also got the Food Administration. This one I want to stop on for a second. Herbert Hoover is in charge of this one. He will later become a president. He is extraordinary at this role. He is going to be able to manage the food supply across this country to not only keep all Americans fed, but half of Europe as well. He's a really, really good administrator. And then you also have the Field Administration under Harry Garfield. He's the grandson of James Garfield. And this is where we're going to get daylight savings time, where they're going to adjust the daylight, the working hours to fit the daylight hours so that we can conserve on electricity. There's going to be meatless Mondays, and there's going to be gasless Wednesdays, and different ways for Americans to conserve different things so that we can ration scarce goods. And so it's important to know what the word rationing means, not only with this war, but also with World War II, because that's how we manage to provide everybody with a little bit of something when things are scarce and not available, across the board. Now, minority groups are also going to be involved in World War One. Women are going to take the jobs that the men leave behind. They're going to roll up their shirt sleeves and become factory workers and ambulance drivers and nurses. And because of their efforts during this time period, they're going to change Woodrow Wilson's mind on the ability of women to be able to vote, because women had always been looked at the weaker sex, and they were just too emotional to be able to make an honest decision about president and stuff. And he saw differently that they were capable and they weren't emotionally unstable and stuff like that because of what they did during World War One. African Americans are going to serve. They're unfortunately going to be serving in segregated units, but they are going to serve in several aspects of the war. Louis Armstrong, who is going to become very popular in the 1920s with his jazz music, he will be with a group that will go over and play jazz music for the troops during this war. This is also the time of the beginning of the Great Migration. The Great Migration starts in World War One and continues on into the 1920s, and this is where African Americans in large numbers are going to move out of the South and go north and west, and they're looking for better job opportunities and less discrimination, trying to escape the Jim Crow laws of the South. Now, they will find better jobs. They won't find less discrimination. Sometimes the race riots in the North could be worse than they were in the South. And then because of the current pandemic, the influenza pandemic of 1918, I'm sure you've all heard about, and that's why all these people are wearing face coverings. It will kill 20 to 50 million people worldwide and 500,000 Americans during this time. But what most people don't realize is that about 50,000 Americans a year die from just the regular garden variety flu. It's just not publicized as much as it is, as it was back then. Now, the war is going to end. Let me go to this next slide. After the Battle of the Argonne Forest, but that is going to be pivotal because of some things that happen a little bit earlier. You're going to have the Russian Revolution that happens in 1970. The Bolsheviks are going to overthrow Tsar Nicholas and eventually execute him and his family. And Vladimir Lenin is going to come to power. And they're going to sue for peace from Germany, a separate peace. And it's called the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. And they're going to get out of the war. And Germany's going to go, woohoo, woohoo, we can win now. And about the time that the Russians get out, the Americans come in. And when America comes in, they're bringing fresh troops and more firepower. And it's not going to be too long before the Germans finally say, yeah, we've had enough. And so they're going to ask for an armistice. An armistice is a ceasefire. Right? And it's going to happen on the 11th month, at the 11th hour, on the 11th day. Today we call that Veterans Day, but when I was growing up, that was Armistice Day. And we always celebrated it. We never got off. We always had big, the ROTC at school always had the big program. But if you'll look at this graph right here, you can see just by the numbers that you can look at, the high cost of this war. Now, casualties is this total here, and it includes all of this. But just go over here and look at the number of dead. It's just incredible. Okay. Like I said, an entire generation of Europe is gone because of this war. So you're going to have, now this was just the armistice. This is a ceasefire. And later on, they're going to get together and they're going to come up with what becomes known as the Treaty of Versailles. Now, the Treaty of Versailles is negotiated with these four men here, the big four. And this is Lloyd George of Britain. This is, I think this one's Orlando of Italy. This is Clemenceau of France. And this is Woodrow Wilson of the United States. Now, Wilson has come with a pocket full of ideas called the 14 Points. This was his peace plan. And it was a way to get both sides, really, to come away with something. Okay? Now, 5 of the most important pieces of his 14 points was the end to secret treaties and alliances, freedom of the seas. People should be able, countries should be able to sail back and forth across the oceans without fear of being sunk. He wants to get rid of trade barriers. Everybody should be able to trade equally with anybody else based off of competition and prices. He wants each country to be able to self-determine what their government's going to be. So if you want to be communist, fine. If you want to be democratic, fine. If you want to be a monarchy, that's okay. You just don't have the right to be able to force your government onto somebody else. And so that's what the self-determination of countries is. And of course, the kingpin of all of this was a formation of a League of Nations where all countries should come together and sit down and talk about their differences before they go to war. Maybe we can iron all these out before everything gets to be a big problem. Well, he comes with this, and he's got this plan that everybody can come away with something. These 3 guys are not interested at all. All they're interested in is throwing Germany under the bus and rolling it back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Okay? And so the only thing that really is going to come out of this that is part of Wilson's 14 points is the establishment of a League of Nations that we will never join. So Germany, in the Treaty of Versailles, is going to lose all their colonies and part of their country. And I'll show you a map here in a minute of what Europe looks like after the treaty. They're going to be reduced to about 100,000 man army. Now, if you know anything about German history, you know that they are a warrior nation from their various beginnings, even when Rome had the Roman Empire had control of them. And so that's going to do a mental thing on their head. They have to accept all guilt for the war. Now, they didn't go in this by themselves. It was Austria-Hungary and a couple other places, Turkey, but they're going to be made to take all responsibility for this war. And then they're going to be charged these huge reparation payments. Now, reparations are payments for war damages. $33 billion. They just paid that off about 5 years ago. So it would be like you and your friends going out and decide to do something you thought was cool, but then you get in trouble for it, and your other friends get off the hook, and you get thrown into a room where all you got is 4 walls and a ceiling. You're grounded for the rest of your known existence. You're only allowed out of your room to eat. You've lost access to everything. No phone, no television, no internet, and you're mad. And you sit there and you cede. Well, that's what Germany's going to do between these 2 wars. They're going to resent this for 20 years. Most historians will say that the seeds of World War II are planted in the ashes of World War I. Okay? And so this is the Treaty of Versailles. Now let me switch on down to this map for you. So after the war, you have got the creation of a lot of new places. So Yugoslavia, Serbia doesn't get their independence by themselves. They're all part now of Yugoslavia. Okay. You have Austria and Hungary that are 2 countries. Germany has lost all of its colonies and then part of its country to form not only Czechoslovakia but also part of Poland. They wanted Poland to have access to the sea. So this little piece right here is going to become really important when we get to World War II. That's known as the Danzig Corridor. Poland is going to be an independent country again for a while. Poland has a history of being consumed and then spit back out and consumed and spit back out. Poland's been its own country for the longest in its entire existence since World War One. And so they're going to basically redraw the map of Europe. Now, when the Treaty of Versailles goes back to the United States, Congress is going to throw its arms up at it and say, nope, we are not going to do this. Now, they have a couple of reasons. For one, they don't like the way it was worked up, but they also are afraid that if we sign the treaty and if we join the League of Nations, that will obligate us to future European conflicts. And so in the Senate, it's a group called the Reservationists, and because they have reservations about the treaty, and they are going to be led by Senator Henry Cabot Lodge. In the House, they're called the Irreconcilables. And that's even with, Wilson is going to go on a tour of the country, making speeches all over the country, trying to raise support for the Treaty of Versailles, to the point where he is going to wear himself out and he's going to have a massive stroke. He will come back to Washington and basically run the country from his bed for the rest of his time in office, for his last 2 years in office, with his wife being the go-between between him and his cabinet, because he was so adamant about this League of Nations and he could not get any support for it. Now, the effects of World War I. This is going to put us on an equal footing with the other superpowers. So we're up there with Britain, France, Russia, or the Soviet Union as it's called now. Now that women and blacks have moved into different job classifications, they're going to stay there. Now, not all women are going to get to keep their jobs. When Johnny comes marching home, they will be made to go back and resume being housewives. But some women will stay in the workforce. Because of the overthrow of the Tsar and the establishment of communism in Russia, this is going to ignite anti-communism in this country. That's because Vladimir Lenin is going to say right out in front of everybody that for communism to be successful, it has to be spread worldwide. Well, you know how we are as Americans. We like our liberties, and we're very possessive of them. And so that's going to make everybody over here really paranoid and intimidated by the Soviet Union. And so we're going to come back home, and we're going to go back to isolationism, stick our head back in the sand, and not pay attention to what's going on in the rest of the world. And of course, as I was showing you a minute ago, the map of Europe is going to be redrawn. And so this is going to leave us at the end of the 1910s, so 1918, 1919. Next time we get together, we're going to be talking about the Roaring Twenties. And this is a fun one. Everybody seems to like the Roaring Twenties because of Prohibition and the gangsters and the flappers and the jazz music. And so when we get back together, we'll start talking about the 1920s. Until then, y'all have a good one. Bye.